I couldn't move. My body was limp, heavy, like I'd slipped beneath the floorboards. The house had quietly kept going without me. My mind was awake, fully awake. But the rest of me, my arms, legs, and voice, was already shutting down. Right next to me, Eli lay still. My son. My whole world. 11 years old and brave without even knowing it. I could barely make out his face. My vision was blurring at the edges. But I saw his chest rise and fall. He was breathing. And so was I. But then I heard it. His voice. Jared. My husband, just a few feet away. And what he said didn't sound like panic. It didn't sound like concern. It sounded finished. It's done. They will both be gone soon. I don't know if my heart stopped or sped up. All I know is that those words will echo in my mind forever, because I wasn't supposed to hear them, because I wasn't supposed to be alive to hear them. As his footsteps faded down the hallway, slow, unhurried, I stayed still. Every instinct screamed at me to move, to grab Eli, to scream, to run. But I didn't. Instead, I leaned just enough to whisper in my son's ear, "Don't move yet." And he didn't. Because even in that moment, he understood something wasn't right. I think it was instinct. Or maybe muscle memory from the years I spent as a nurse, watching people on the edge of life and death, knowing when not to panic. But deep down, something older than logic kicked in. A voice that said, "Stay still. Wait. Survive. Let me take you back." A few hours earlier, our life looked normal, at least on the surface. Or maybe I was just holding onto the illusion harder than I realized. My name is Naomi. I'm 38, a mom first, a nurse by training. And until recently, I thought I was still a wife. I left my job when Eli was born and never looked back. He became my everything, bright, curious, always watching. He mimicked the way I stirred my coffee, the way I folded laundry, even the way I hummed when I was thinking. He was my little shadow, my scientist, my reason. Jared and I had been married 12 years. We met when I was 25. He was tall, clever, magnetic in the way some men are before you learn how much of it is habit. He was good to me, at first. Notes on the mirror, flowers for no reason. He cried harder than I did the day Eli was born. I remember thinking, this is it. This is the man I'll grow old with. But time wears people down in strange ways. At first it was little things. He stopped laughing at Eli's jokes, stopped touching my shoulder when he passed behind me in the kitchen, stopped being present. Then came the secrets. Locked phone, whispered calls, long absences with weak excuses. When I asked, he got angry, said I was being paranoid, controlling, so I stopped asking. I chose peace over truth. I smiled at dinner, smiled for Eli, smiled like I wasn't slowly sinking. Then last week, Jared came home early. Early was rare. He kissed Eli on the head, looked at me, and said, "I'm cooking dinner tonight." I blinked. "Since when do you cook?" He shrugged. "Just want to do something nice. You've been working hard." It felt off, but I wanted to believe. So I said, "That sounds wonderful." That night, I set the table with our good plates. Eli picked music to play in the background. Jared hummed in the kitchen while stirring mashed potatoes like he did it every night. Except he didn't. He had never cooked a full meal in 12 years. We sat down, steak, green beans, mashed potatoes, simple, familiar, comfort food. Except something was off. The steak was dry, the beans were too salty, and the mashed potatoes, too smooth, too shiny, too wrong. I took a bite. It tasted fine at first, but underneath the butter, bitterness. My stomach turned. Eli was eating, but slowly. He made a face and rubbed his eyes. Then he whispered, "Mom, my tummy hurts." I knew. God, I knew. This wasn't food poisoning. This wasn't bad cooking. This was something else. Then came the dizziness, the tilt of the room, the dry mouth, the weight in my limbs, the way sound seemed to pull away from me. I reached for Eli, but my arm didn't listen. My fingers were numb. My vision dimmed. But I heard everything. Jared is scraping his plate, running water at the sink. No panic in his voice, no rushing to check on us, just be calm, measured, and then, "It's done. They'll both be gone soon." I collapsed next to Eli. I pressed his hand under mine, squeezed just once. He tensed. He understood. I whispered, "Don't move yet." And we lay there, waiting. Because sometimes surviving starts with stillness. I didn't know how long we lay there. Could have been 30 seconds. Could have been 3 minutes. Time gets weird when you're terrified. The only sounds were my heartbeat pounding in my ears, and Eli's breathing, slow, shallow, but steady. Then, the footsteps, Jared's footsteps, retreating down the hallway, unhurried, deliberate, like a man cleaning up after himself. I heard him pause. The hush that followed felt like ice settling in the walls. Then, a click. The front door, closing, gone. I opened my eyes. Just a sliver. Afraid of what I'd see. Afraid it had all been a test. But the kitchen was empty. Quiet. Too quiet. I pressed my hand against Eli's back. He tensed under my touch but didn't move. He was awake. He had heard everything, too. I leaned in and whispered, "Bathroom. Now try to throw up. Spit everything out if you can." His eyes locked with mine, wide, terrified, but alert. He nodded once, then crawled, slow, shaky, but moving. I followed behind him, dragging my legs like sandbags. Each inch felt like a mile. We made it to the guest bathroom. I shut the door, turned on the faucet, let the water run loudly, just in case Jared hadn't left. Then I knelt over the sink and forced myself to vomit. I dug my fingers into my throat, twice, 3 times, until the bitterness came up in waves, the nausea, the dizziness, the bile, everything. Beside me, Eli did the same. Tears streamed down his cheeks as he gagged, coughed, and heaved, but he got it out. My brave, brilliant boy. I slumped to the floor, back against the cabinet, breathing hard. The room swam around me, but it wasn't spinning anymore. Eli crawled over and pressed into my side. I wrapped my arm around him and whispered, "You did good, baby. We're okay." "Mom." His voice was so small. Why would he do that? I didn't have an answer. Not yet. I just shook my head. "We need to go." I reached for my phone. Nothing. Black screen, no restart, no logo, no battery warning, just dead. It had been fine that morning. That's when it hit me. This wasn't an accident. Jared planned everything. I grabbed the wall phone, silent, dead. My pulse jumped again. No time. We leave now. I opened the cabinet beneath the sink, found the emergency flashlight we kept for storms, wrapped Eli in my hoodie, tied his shoes with shaking hands. He watched me. Didn't ask questions, didn't cry. He just held my wrist. We moved through the laundry room toward the garage. I didn't know if Jared was gone. I didn't know if he was watching from the car or waiting somewhere in the dark. But we couldn't wait to find out. I reached for the garage door. Didn't use the electric opener. Manual, slow, loud. It groaned like it hadn't been opened in years. The sound scraped down my spine. I peeked outside. No car in the driveway. No one on the street. Just the empty hush of early evening. "Go!" I whispered. Eli bolted, barefoot across the grass, straight toward Miss Laverne's house. She'd lived next door for 20 years. Tough as nails. Always home. Always watching from behind her lace curtains. I hobbled after him, legs still jelly, vision swimming. By the time I reached the porch, Eli was pounding on her door with both fists. She opened it fast, confused at first. But then she saw our faces. My pale skin. Eli's red eyes. The way I could barely stand. "What happened?" she gasped. "Call 911, I choked. "He poisoned us. My husband. He tried to kill us." Her expression changed in a blink, from shock to steel. She pulled us inside, locked the door, grabbed her phone. 5 minutes later, I heard sirens. Red lights lit the walls like lightning. And for the first time in hours, I let myself breathe. We were alive, but this story was just beginning. The ride to the hospital blurred past like a half-remembered nightmare. Red lights, radios crackling, hands on my shoulders, gloves against my skin. They kept asking questions, but I could barely answer. "Your name? Can you hear me? Do you know what you took?" I wanted to say. "Ask my husband." He cooked it, but the words wouldn't form right in my mouth. All I could do was hold Eli's hand across the stretcher. His fingers trembled inside mine. At the ER, they moved fast. Needles, machines, flashing monitors, clipboards, and pens scribbling furiously. I knew this place. I used to move at it too when I wore scrubs, back before I traded night shifts for storybooks and science fair projects. But this time, I wasn't behind the curtain. I was at the table. Eli was taken to a separate exam room. The second they tried to pull us apart, he panicked. "I want my mom!" His voice cracked on the word. It broke something in me, something that hadn't even begun to heal. "It's okay," I whispered, forcing strength into my tone. "I'll be right here. They just want to make sure we're okay." He nodded, just once, then disappeared behind the curtain. A nurse came over. She looked young, but her eyes were kind and steady. "You're lucky," she said. "Whatever it was, you got it out early." That word again. Lucky. They took blood, ran tests, checked vitals. I watched the second hand on the clock like it owed me something. Each tick, another moment I wasn't dead. Another moment Eli was still alive. When the doctor came in, his expression was unreadable. Clipboard in hand, chart under arm, the kind of face trained not to flinch at anything. "We ran a tox screen," he began. I nodded slowly. It was a sedative, strong, crushed and mixed into the food, most likely a high dose of benzodiazepine. I swallowed hard. "How high?" "Very." "You're lucky you forced yourself to vomit. If it had absorbed fully—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. I already knew how it ended. A police officer came in about an hour later, uniform neat, notepad ready. I recognized the look in his eyes, trying to stay calm in front of a victim who doesn't know she's still in danger. He sat beside me. "Ma'am, I'm going to need your statement." I gave him everything, word for word, from the mashed potatoes to the whispered plan, from the bathroom floor to the garage escape. I didn't leave anything out. Not the squeeze of Eli's hand, not the click of the front door, not the way Jared washed his hands like he was erasing us. The officer nodded as he wrote. His jaw clenched once, hard. Then I asked the question that had been sitting at the base of my spine since we left the house. "Did you find him?" His pause was too long. He's not at the residence. "The car is gone. We've issued a statewide alert." My stomach dropped, not from poison this time, but from the realization he could still get away. He could disappear, and we'd be looking over our shoulders for the rest of our lives. But 2 days later, I got the call. They caught him. At the airport, trying to board a flight to Belize. Fake passport, second phone, new credit cards, cash. He didn't panic and run. He had planned this, carefully, methodically, for weeks, maybe longer, and the more I learned, the more horrifying it became. The hospital room was quiet, but my mind wasn't. The machines beeped steadily. Eli slept in the bed beside me, small and pale under white sheets. But I couldn't stop listening, for footsteps in the hallway, for the creak of a door, for anything that sounded like him. Jared. Gone. Missing. And free. The officer said they had issued a statewide alert, that his car wasn't at the house, that they were checking airports, train stations, and border crossings. But I'd seen what Jared was capable of now. I'd seen how he moved, how calm he was, how prepared. He hadn't panicked. He had smiled through dinner. He had washed his hands while we lay unconscious on the floor. This wasn't a heat-of-the-moment decision. It was an exit strategy, one he had built piece by piece. And now, I couldn't stop wondering, how long had he been planning it? How far was he willing to go? What else had I missed? The news hadn't gone public yet. But something in me knew that when it did, he'd already be gone. I didn't sleep the next night either, not even when the nurse dimmed the lights and whispered, "You're safe now." Because I wasn't, not until he was in handcuffs. The next day, I sat by the window in the hospital lounge, sipping a cup of coffee I couldn't taste, when a uniformed detective approached me. Different from the officer before. Older, sharper around the edges. He introduced himself. Said he'd be taking over the investigation. Then, without sitting down, he said, "We found him." I didn't breathe. Not till he finished the sentence. He was at the airport, trying to board a flight to Belize. Fake passport, second phone. And just like that, I exhaled for the first time in what felt like years. They showed me a photo. It was grainy from security footage. But it was him, Jared, wearing a baseball cap, sunglasses, and that same casual smirk I'd once loved, like he was boarding a flight to paradise. But he wasn't going to paradise. He was going to prison. He was arrested before he could board. Didn't resist, didn't argue, just handed over the documents, the passport, and the phone, like he knew it was over, like the plan had failed, and that was that. He'd packed light, one carry-on bag, one set of clean clothes, and a folder with financial documents, bank transfers, insurance policies, a new identity. It was all there. The life he was going to start. Without me. Without Eli. I was still processing all of it when my sister Alina flew in. She walked into the hospital room with red eyes and a suitcase and immediately burst into tears. Not the dramatic kind. The kind that comes from guilt. From knowing something and not saying it soon enough. We waited until Eli was asleep again. Then she sat beside me, hands wringing in her lap, and whispered, "Naomi, I didn't want to tell you, but I think I have to now." My stomach turned. I didn't want to hear it, but I nodded anyway. "Jared's been cheating, I've known for about 2 months. I blinked. Of course, it made sense, the coldness, the distance, the lies. She continued, "I saw him. With a woman. Young, maybe 25. They were at that restaurant in Midtown. He kissed her. She looked down. I followed them. They went to a condo. I didn't know what to do. I thought maybe it was just a phase or something he'd walk away from. But it wasn't a phase. It wasn't weakness. It was planned. And it got worse." Alina pulled out her phone and showed me something she dug up. A news article. About a trust fund. A young woman was set to inherit a large sum, but only if she married someone with no prior debts. No children, no complications. Jared had found a loophole. He just needed to eliminate us. The poisoning. The fake documents. The plane ticket. It all pointed in one direction. He didn't just want to leave. He wanted to erase us. And if I hadn't whispered to Eli, if we hadn't made it to the bathroom, if Miss Laverne hadn't opened that door, we would have been gone, just like Jared wanted. He was charged with attempted murder, felony or child endangerment, and use of a controlled substance with the intent to harm. He pleaded not guilty, at first, but the evidence, the mashed potatoes, the toxicology report, the photos, the bank records, the passport, the woman, the second phone. There was too much to climb out from under, so he changed his plea. Guilty. And just like that, he was gone for good. Sentenced to life in prison, no chance of parole. But justice doesn't heal everything, and truth doesn't undo the fear. It just lets you start. After Jared was arrested, things didn't get quieter, they got louder. Not outside, but inside my head. The adrenaline wore off. The sedative left my system. The doctor said I was stable, but no one warned me about what comes after survival, the flood, the questions, the unraveling. I couldn't stop rewinding everything, every late night, every business trip, every moment I brushed off with, "He's just stressed." But it wasn't stressful. It was the strategy. And the closer I looked, the more I realized he had been planning this for a long time. The police seized Jared's laptop and went through his emails. The detective came back with a stack of documents that made my stomach turn. Fake identities, bank transfers, multiple applications for offshore accounts. And something worse. A prenup draft dated 2 years ago. We never had a prenup. Not when we married. But this draft wasn't for me. It was for her. The other woman. And then came the twist I didn't expect. She didn't know. She wasn't a co-conspirator. She was a piece of the plan, but not part of the planning. Everything Jared told her was a lie. He was single. He never wanted kids. He was in the process of relocating overseas. Her name was Ashley. She was 26, a graphic designer. Her father had passed 6 months earlier, leaving behind a sizable inheritance. But there was a catch. Ashley would only receive the full amount if she married someone free of debt and dependent obligations within a year. It was a clause set up by a controlling old money family. A legal quirk Jared saw as a golden opportunity. He didn't fall in love with Ashley. He fell in love with her face, her inheritance, her future. But to claim that future, he had to erase his past, erase us. And so he did what he did best. He smiled. He served dinner. He told us he was trying again. He made mashed potatoes, with crushed sedatives stirred into the butter. When I learned all of this, I didn't feel anger right away. I felt something colder. Disbelief? Not that he did it, but I didn't see it. How could I sleep next to someone who had this plan in motion? How could I kiss a man who would have watched our son die for a down payment on a new life? My sister Alina was the one who helped me dig deeper. Together we went through Jared's office. He kept everything organized, receipts, contracts, passwords, like a man who thought no one would ever question him, like a man who didn't believe we'd survive. We found receipts for a second condo in the city, a private investigator he'd hired months earlier, on me, a safe deposit box under a different name. In that box, cash, IDs, more paperwork, more evidence, and one final insult. A list of talking points for his future life. Where he'd gone to school, where he grew up. What would he say if someone asked about children? I wanted them, but it never happened. He wrote us out like we were a bad draft. A mistake he could rewrite, but he didn't count on me listening. Didn't count on Eli surviving. Didn't count on a whisper being louder than his whole plan. The prosecutors added fraud and identity charges to his case. Ashley gave a statement too. Devastated, blindsided. She had nothing to do with the plan. Just another victim. Used like we were. I didn't hate her. I pitied her. Because at least I had the truth. She was still grieving a version of Jared that never existed. What broke me most wasn't the paperwork. Wasn't the password. It was a single photo I found in Jared's drawer. Eli and I at the park. From last summer. Eli is on my shoulders laughing. Me looking up at him mid-laugh. We looked happy. Real. Like a family. And on the back, in Jared's handwriting, it said, "Last good memory." Before the reset. I didn't cry, not then, because the only thing colder than what he did was knew he gave himself a clean emotional exit and left us to burn. But I wasn't going to burn anymore. I was going to rebuild, even if it meant starting from ashes. They said I didn't have to go. The prosecutors told me I could submit a statement instead. The advocate said it might be easier on me and on Eli, but I went anyway, because I needed to see it. I needed to see him. Not in our kitchen, not at the dinner table, not holding a wooden spoon and humming, but in a courtroom, under oath, under lights, under the weight of everything he tried to bury. The first time I saw Jared in handcuffs, something in me cracked, not from sadness, from recognition. I finally saw him, the man behind the mask, the one I'd sensed was shifting for years, and there he was. Orange jumpsuit, hair shorter, eyes duller, still trying to look unbothered. Still clinging to the illusion of control, but it was gone. Everyone in that room saw him for what he was now. Not a father, not a husband, not a man under Strauss. A planner. A liar. A man who nearly killed his wife and child for a fresh start and someone else's fortune. The courtroom was cold, quiet. Everything felt heavy, like the walls were holding their breath. They read the charges one by one. Attempted murder, felony child endangerment, use of a controlled substance with the intent to harm, fraud, identity theft, conspiracy to commit financial crimes. He pleaded not guilty. At first, the trial didn't last long. The evidence didn't just speak, it screamed. Toxicology reports, bank transfers, the forged passport, the fake condo lease, my recorded testimony, Ashley's statement, even the receipt from the pharmacy where he bought the sedatives, using a burner credit card tied to one of his alias accounts. The prosecution called it one of the most calculated domestic betrayal cases they'd seen in years. I testified on day 4. I stood in front of the court, looked at the jury, and told them everything. From the taste of the mashed potatoes to the whisper in Eli's ear to the sound of Jared calmly rinsing his hands. And then I looked at him. He didn't blink, didn't flinch, didn't say a word, but I could tell he knew it was over. That night his lawyer approached the prosecution with a deal. Jared would plead guilty in exchange for life without parole instead of multiple stacked sentences. The DA accepted, because it wasn't about revenge anymore, it was about removal, making sure he never had another chance. The sentencing was quiet. No big crowds, no reporters inside, just the judge, a few officers, lawyers, and me. I sat in the front row. Alina is beside me. My hands were folded. My breath is steady. The judge asked Jared if he had anything to say. He stood, turned slightly toward me, and for the first time since that night, he opened his mouth. I never meant for it to go that far. That was all. No apology, no ownership, no truth, just a sentence built to sound like regret without admitting to a single thing. The judge didn't buy it. This wasn't a moment of rage, she said. This was a plan. Weeks, maybe months in the making. You had every opportunity to walk away, but instead you chose to erase your family. Then she sentenced him. Life in prison, no chance of parole. When they led him away, he didn't look back, and neither did I. Afterward, I stood in the hallway outside the courtroom. For the first time in months, no one needed anything from me. No questions, no nurses, no detectives, no fear creeping in through the front door. Just me. Just air. Just the cold echo of marble floors under my boots. I walked out into the sunlight. It was spring by then. The trees had started to bloom again, and I realized this wasn't the end of the story, but it was the end of his chapter, and finally mine could begin. People kept asking me how I was doing. Doctors, nurses, caseworkers, kind strangers at the grocery store who'd read the headlines and recognized my face. You're so strong. You're a survivor. I can't imagine what you went through. They meant well, but the truth? I didn't feel strong. I felt hollow, like someone had picked me up, shook me out, and left just enough of me behind to keep walking. Eli and I moved in with Alina after the trial, not forever, just until we figured out what came next. Her guest room became our soft landing, neutral walls, clean sheets, a small nightlight she'd plugged in without asking. And most nights, I'd find Eli curled beside me in bed by morning. He never said a word about it, just tucked under my arm like it was the most natural thing in the world. And I never stopped him. Because sometimes the safest thing we can give our kids is permission to hold on. He didn't talk much about Jared. Once I found him staring out at the window, fingers tracing the fogged glass. "Do you think he thought about me at all?" he asked. The kind of question that doesn't have a real answer. But I gave him the truth I knew. Maybe he thought about himself too much to see anything else. He nodded, didn't ask again. Some days were better than others. There were moments of laughter, small ones. Eli dancing in the kitchen to a song he liked. Me forgetting for a split second that the door didn't need to be double locked. Moments where the world didn't feel like it might collapse again. And then there were the other days, the ones where my hands trembled while making dinner, where the smell of mashed potatoes made my stomach twist, where Eli would sit quietly, not touching his food, until I sat beside him and whispered, "We're safe now." Therapy helped, not all at once, not in a breakthrough kind of way, but in the slow, steady process of saying things out loud, of claiming the parts of my story I'd never spoken. He didn't just try to kill me, I told my therapist one afternoon. He tried to erase us. She nodded gently. And he failed. Eli started drawing again, sketchbooks full of spaceships and strange creatures, but one day he handed me a drawing that stopped me cold. It was a house. Ours. Except in the front yard there were two stick figures, a mom, a son, no dad. He'd drawn a huge sunflower between them. "It's us," he said, "and the flower's like hope." I held it together until he left the room. Then I cried into my hands for 10 whole minutes. 3 months passed. We found a small rental house near Alina's. Nothing big, nothing fancy, but it had sunlight that poured into the kitchen every morning and a door that clicked softly when it locked. Eli picked out new curtains for his room. I bought a second-hand coffee maker and made it mine. We started slow. No TV during dinner, no phone by the bed, no pretending things were perfect, just real. One night, Eli asked if I thought people could grow back like flowers. I looked at him and said, "I think some people grow stronger in places they were once broken." He nodded, like he already knew that. We weren't healed yet, not fully, maybe never. But we were here, still breathing, still building, and for the first time in a long time, that felt like enough.